again, everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines on MC22, joined as always by Gabe DeArmond and Dave Manner. My name is Bo Bayman. The bye week has come and gone, the sort of pandemic-induced bye week. The Tigers haven't played since their win against LSU at home. The schedule gets a little bit altered as Florida was supposed to be up next. Florida's not up next. We talk about a game at home against Kentucky this Saturday at 3 o'clock, and things are changing, and as we talked about last week, Dave, it's sort of day-to-day, week-by-week, and so you got to just roll with the punches.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, this season seems like it's been going on forever, and Missouri's only played 3 games. And, 40% of their schedule has already been changed either by the date or the location, and I think it's naive to think that there won't be some other changes, maybe not to Missouri's schedule, but to somebody else's in the SEC. So I give them credit for being really nimble and being able to move these things around. But this is just what we have to come to expect in 2020.
We'll talk about Kentucky in just a little bit. But, Gabe, I know you guys don't get to go to practice, but at the same time, I would expect Missouri was working on Missouri during their unexpected bye week.
Yeah, you would think that, and recruiting. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure what else you can do because, like Eli Drinkwitz said, he game planned for 3 teams. You're not sure who you're going to play. I don't think on Halloween, Missouri is sure who it will play at this point or if it will play. So you just kind of got to be prepared for everything and control the part you can control, which is how well you play and, how well your players stay away from places they're going to get a virus that affects other teams' schedules.
And Gabe, staying with that, the good news, if there's any good news, is it hasn't been Missouri that's caused the cancellations. It's been the other schools.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's good news or not because it is kind of frustrating, not only for Missouri, but for Kentucky. I know some of their fans were upset the way this schedule change happened. Now Kentucky is set to play like Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee all 3 weeks in a row. And so it's changed the order of their schedule, theoretically made it more difficult. This is all resulting from Vanderbilt and mostly from Florida at this point in time. I'm sure there's frustration, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Just as a reminder, the Tigers were supposed to have played Vanderbilt. That was the one that got canceled. Then it was supposed to be Florida. That one got flipped around, so they'll play Florida in a week. And right now they're taking on Kentucky. And, Dave, let's be honest, Kentucky's a dangerous team. They really put it to Tennessee last week.
Yeah, they look like a different team than they were the first 2 weeks of the season. They've scored more defensive touchdowns the last 2 games than they've allowed offensive touchdowns. And, they shut down Mississippi State, which is looking like it's not as hard to do as maybe we thought it would be this year. And then really took it to Tennessee in Knoxville and made Tennessee look much more like a pretender than a contender in this division for sure. But they're playing the style that has worked for Mark Stoops' best teams. They run it all day long behind a really good offensive line, and then they play really good pass defense. So I think those are 2 matchups for Missouri that I'm not sure really work in Mizzou's favor. Not that we really know a lot about this team. They seem to evolve every game. I mean, you look at Missouri's 3 games, they're so different the way that they've unfolded. But I think Kentucky's a tough matchup, just like they've been for 5 years. I mean, Missouri hasn't beaten this team since 2014.
And that was the gimmick yesterday, Gabe, was Eli Drinkwitz saying to his team, raise your hand if you've beaten Kentucky. Nobody raises their hand. I mean, Kentucky has had their number despite, the last time they were at Faroe, it was a controversial finish. But nevertheless, the Wildcats have won 5 straight against the Tigers.
Yeah, and there's always, going into this game, there's always, from Missouri fans, some reason that Missouri's going to win this game, right? I mean, this year it's, well, yeah, but Kentucky's scoring all these defensive touchdowns. That's not sustainable. That can't happen. Last year it was, they don't even have a quarterback. The year before that, really the 2 years before that, we got screwed by the refs, and that part I actually kind of agree with. But regardless, every year Kentucky wins the game, and Missouri fans have this idea that we should never lose to Kentucky in football. You can think that all you want, but they've won 5 in a row, and I actually ran the numbers earlier this week and looked at it. Kentucky has established itself as the number 3 program in this division right now, behind Georgia and Florida. They've got a better overall record and a better SEC record than Tennessee, South Carolina, and Missouri. And that's over the last 5.5 seasons. So that's the program people are trying to catch. Tennessee fans, Missouri fans, South Carolina fans, I promise, if you ask them all, who do you need to catch? Well, we got to catch Florida and Georgia. No, you got to catch Kentucky first. And then after you do that, worry about catching Florida and Georgia.
And Dave, I was trying to remember the last time the Tigers beat Kentucky, was that the DGB game?
It was, yeah. When Matty Mock and him connected for like 17 touchdowns down in Lexington. And you just kind of thought, okay, well, Missouri's won 3 in a row now against these guys. Kentucky can't touch Missouri. And it has been all downhill since then. So, yeah, no players on this team have ever beaten Kentucky. Missouri has more players that have beaten Missouri than have beaten Kentucky because their punter, Grant McInnes, came from Kentucky, where he was part of – he didn't play necessarily in all those games, but he was part of the 4 wins. Even Missouri's coaching staff, the guys that hung around from the Barry Odom staff, they've never beaten Kentucky because Ryan Walters has been here the longest, and he didn't come on board till 2015. So this is one that I think should – and I think the way I phrase it, this would kind of gnaw at your pride a little bit if you're a veteran player. It's one thing to have a losing streak against Georgia, which everybody also has on Missouri's team. But Kentucky, if you want to be somebody in the SEC, at some point you got to win this game. Otherwise, like Gabe said, you're just chasing the pack.
Hey, Dave, what's any injury update? I know 2 weeks off is kind of nice to get healthy. Any injury updates that we need to know about?
Yeah, the 2 guys that stand out are the 2 defensive tackles, Kobe Whiteside and Darius Robinson. And Drinkwitz said both of those guys probably won't be really evaluated until Missouri's next bye week. And coincidentally enough, Kentucky's really good nose tackle, Quentin Bohanna, is out for this game with a knee injury. So both teams are going to rely on, backups there. But I'll say this much for Markel Etsy and Mizzou's D-line. They did a pretty good job considering everything it was up against in that LSU game. But now it's a different kind of challenge. Really good Kentucky offensive line, a team that is built on a running game. And it'll be a challenge.
And Gabe, that means that some of the wide receivers are coming back for the Tigers. And when you look at the depth chart, there's a lot of either-ors on that first string.
Yeah, Drinkwitz said yesterday that basically right now they don't have anybody in COVID protocol. Now, that was right now, Tuesday at 12:30. We're taping this Wednesday at 9 a.m. People are seeing it Friday night. So between then and now, who knows what might happen. But as of Wednesday morning, they don't have anybody in protocol, which is good. You mentioned the receivers, and it was interesting. I think there was a message sent on that depth chart. Damon Hazelton's listed as a 3rd stringer. Kiki Chisholm, I believe, is listed as a 2nd stringer, as possibly like an but 2nd on the depth chart. I think there was a message sent to those guys, not only in the LSU game where the backups outperformed anything they'd done, but also by the head coach saying, all right, guys, you want your spot back, you got to come get it.
And you got to be available. That's the whole thing, because Dave, he can roll out the backups and say, hey, we beat LSU with these guys. We're fine.
And they played much better. I mean, they didn't drop the ball at all. They just did the simple things. They caught the ball and they made yards after the catch. And who knows if Missouri's receivers do that, not against Alabama, because I don't think that was the difference in the game. But if they do that at Tennessee, maybe that's a different outcome. Who knows? So, yeah, I think probably they look at this like there's not really any established starters. Who plays the best in practice will get a chance to start the game, and then whoever plays the best in the game will get the most reps. And if it's one of those older guys who was out with contact tracing a week ago, great. If it's one of the backups who played really well against LSU, great. And just throw them out there. It's not like this staff has this incredible allegiance to players that they've been recruiting for years, because they're all new too.
Yeah, absolutely. This game again Saturday at 3:00. The line is Kentucky as we sit. Kentucky by about 5.5 coming here. It should be a decent day for football. It might be a little chilly, but should be a decent day in Columbia, Missouri. Let's go back to last week. One of the things you were able to do was watch the big tilt between Georgia and Alabama. And Gabe, were you surprised that Alabama won with such ease?
I would have been. I actually thought Georgia was going to win pregame. And then in the second half, it kind of became obvious why they didn't. You have to have a big-time quarterback to win games like that. And Stetson Bennett's a great story, and it's really cool and all that. But they're not winning a national title with that guy quarterback. Mac Jones is back there. Now, and, yes, he has the best receiving core in the country. But Mac Jones threw some like big-time first-round NFL draft pick passes in that game. He was phenomenal. And Stetson Bennett, honestly, he looked rattled. Georgia has the guys at every position on the field to go toe-to-toe with Alabama, except the most important one, unless JT Daniels is sitting on their bench. But look, there's 4 tiers in the SEC. Tier 1's Alabama. Tier like 1.5 is Georgia. Tier 3 is literally everyone else except Vanderbilt, and then Vanderbilt's in its own tier, which is not a good thing. But teams 3 through 13, you toss those teams in a hat any given day, and you have no idea who's going to win.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Gabe, I mean, we are going to see that matchup again, aren't we? We're going to see Alabama, Georgia in the SEC title game, I think.
I'd be stunned if you don't, because look, Alabama's the only unbeaten team in the league, and Georgia, Florida, and A&M are the only ones that have only lost once. I mean, so we're 4 weeks into the season. Everybody's 2-2, and I know this is a weird year, and I know we like to laugh about how the SEC puffs its chest out, but SEC is not very good this year, guys.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, Auburn loses. That was the one that shocked me out of anything last week, Auburn losing. I couldn't get over that. And that goes to Gabe's point. 3 through 13 is just a jumbled mess.
Yeah, I think like 3 through 6 isn't nearly as strong as it used to be. And the bottom, like you talked about South Carolina, we'll throw Missouri in there for now, and Ole Miss, and hey, Arkansas, and they're not near the bottom. They should be higher up if we're talking about 1 through 14. The bottom may be just a little better than it has been, to where there's not just a bunch of really bad teams. I mean, there's Vanderbilt. Mississippi State's looking pretty bad right now. But yeah, I just don't think there's much that separates 3 through 12 or so. And I think the gap between Georgia and the rest of the field is bigger than the gap between Alabama and Georgia. Is that good for the league? Well, it's good for the playoffs. If Georgia can somehow get to Atlanta and then beat Alabama, then you probably have 2 SEC teams in the playoffs. If not, then you're just staking everything on Alabama. But I don't see anybody touching Alabama in the West. I mean, they've already played. The next best team is A&M, and they've already beaten them by how many touchdowns? Auburn's not going to touch them this year. LSU's not going to touch them. So, yeah, I think the West is over.
Isn't it great, guys, that it's October 21st and we can just pencil in Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Georgia to the playoff, and we don't even have to play the seat? Like, look, I've said it for years. This is the problem with college football. Yeah. 90% of teams have no chance. I mean, you start the season, you give me 6 teams, and I promise I'm going to pick the 4 that are in the playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only outside chance would be somebody from the Pac-12 running the table. But again, with this year, they might be starting too late.
Running the table in Pac-12 might be 4-0.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Notre Dame could get in there, but just based on their record, and they're going to play a full schedule, but they don't look that good to me. And they'll have the 1 loss to Clemson for sure. But yeah, there's just not much this year. I mean, BYU is a fun, entertaining team to watch, but they're not playing anybody. So their resume may be unbeaten by the end of the regular season, but they're not going to have a win that's going to push them into the playoffs.
But like, if there's ever a year to give BYU or Cincinnati or SMU a shot, go do it. I mean, Georgia, you had your shot. You lost to Alabama. Put them in there, and maybe they get beat 81-0, and we don't have this discussion again.
Alabama will be at Tennessee this week. Auburn's at Ole Miss, and South Carolina's at LSU. I'm a little intrigued for that South Carolina-LSU game, Gabe, just to see. I mean, again, we talked about it 2 weeks ago and last week. Maybe this is the story really is how bad is LSU this year. Let's see if they've circled the wagons after that loss to Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at LSU's schedule and thought probably 3-7, but that included a win over South Carolina. Of course, it also included a loss to Auburn, so who knows? They'll probably all – I don't know if it's mathematically possible for literally everyone to end up 5-5. But if it's mathematically possible, it could happen.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Okay, let's take a break. Our first break here on Tiger Sidelines. When we come back, your tweets. You're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back to Tiger Sidelines, everybody. I'm Bo Bayman, and Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter joining me as always. And we always ask for your tweets, and we got a couple this week. The first one, and Gabe, I'll throw this one to you. This is from Joe. He says, do you think Tyler Macon will redshirt?
I don't know. I mean, he said this week he's going to enroll early. Let's see where Connor Bazelak's at. Let's see if Sean Robinson's still on campus. Let's see where Brady Cook's at. And I do understand why, people are excited about the future and all that, but there's no way to look a year and a half in the future and have any idea. I mean, by that point, Tyler Macon isn't going to have played football in almost 2 full years because he's skipping his senior season to enroll early at Mizzou. So I don't know. I don't know how else to answer that question. Then I don't really have any idea.
And Dave, isn't that the case? He's skipping football this year because Illinois moved it to the spring, right?
Right. East St. Louis and Illinois high school football will be moved to the spring. So if he wants to enroll early, he can't play as a senior, which is a really tough call for him. I look at it this way. It's not really something worth worrying about because it's if he has to redshirt, that means Connor Bazelak is really established as the starter. And that only happens if he continues to play pretty well. And then if he doesn't and they need Macon and they think he's good enough to play as a freshman, then that's probably a pretty good sign too that the guy's really talented. So I think it's better to have that concern than be looking at the recruiting class and like, gosh, they haven't signed the quarterback. What are they going to do in the future? So it's not a bad situation.
You mean like the last 3 years?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Ken wants to know early impressions on Coach Drink from both of you guys.
I mean, he's done most everything right so far. He's recruiting well. He generally does pretty well in front of a microphone. He says the right things for fans. The players seem to like him, and he got a big win. So far, I mean, I think probably has gone about as well as you could have hoped for.
I think he's generated a lot of excitement, and it's a shame that they can't fill the stadium to get some real results, tangible results out of that. But yeah, I mean, he stepped into a situation that roster-wise wasn't terrible. We've seen worse situations at Missouri, but I think the level of apathy is pretty low, and maybe the confidence that Missouri can get back to where it was at its peak under Gary Pinkel. I'm not sure fans really believe that, but I think he has come in and brought some excitement, brought some energy and some charisma. His staff deserves some of the credit there too, that has fans excited. Now, what will that lead to? We don't know, but that can be the hard part sometimes. We've seen it in men's basketball for sure, that ebb and flow there. And, we'll see. But I think he's done a nice job of that part of the job.
I would assume, Gabe, that he's learned a lot in his first 3 games in the SEC too. Just the difference between, I mean, you can see it on TV. You can see it. You don't want to say it's different, but it's different than App State.
Oh, it's different than App State, no question. But I mean, Eli coached at Auburn. He coached at North Carolina State. He's been around big time Power 5 football, and I'm not one of these people who subscribes to just because you've been around the ACC or the Big Ten, you don't understand what the SEC is like. I mean, yeah, it's better, but it's still big time Power 5 football. So I think I'm sure he's learned a decent amount. He's had to adapt a lot, I think, which is something that football coaches are generally awful at, to be honest. They don't like to change things. I mean, Gary Pinkel was famous for, like, on February 3rd, if you asked Gary Pinkel what he was doing at 9:30 on December 17th, he would 100% have been able to tell you. And if that had changed, like, I don't know what that would have done to him. And that's a football coach thing. They can't be that way anymore. So I think that's probably helped. Not necessarily helped a lot of them, but they've definitely learned to be a little bit more flexible. And I think Drinkwitz has probably done that. But look, the other thing that we don't know about him is what's he going to be like when adversity hits? And adversity is not losing to Alabama or starting 0-2. Everybody knew that was going to happen. What are you going to be like if, we found out a lot about Barry Odom in years 2 and 3. Like, after that Auburn game with the Kentucky deal, he just didn't have the right buttons to push to get them back. So what's he going to be like if recruiting takes a hit, or if they go through a 4-game losing streak, or if they drop a game here to Vanderbilt somewhere along the line, something like that? That's when you know a little bit more. I mean, this first year, and really because of what's happened, the first 2 years for him, like, it's going to be real hard to say he did something wrong because, I mean, just the situation he's in.
No doubt. And plus, he can use the the line of, hey, I'm getting my guys in here. I mean, that lasts for 2 to 3 years.
It does. And then eventually that thing kind of runs dry when you've got your own players in there and your own system installed and maybe make some coaching changes along the way. So, yeah, not to say that any coach in the SEC gets a free pass, because I don't think any of them do. I mean, we've seen some guys look at Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State. He didn't last very long, and there's been other examples of that. But considering the circumstances, everything going on with this season, just the uncertainty and the fact that he didn't have much time to practice and really install what he's doing, he's not going to get a lot of criticism unless something on his watch because of him or his players or something like that really goes south. I mean, he hasn't really dealt with off the field stuff that is unique to this program because everybody's dealing with COVID. He's not the only one there that's had that challenge.
And because his players can't leave their apartments, so how are they going to get in trouble?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about basketball starting up. It's kind of been a little under the radar just because of the coverage you can have about basketball right now, but basketball has started up. We'll talk about that and more when we come back on Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines. Gabe DeArmond, Dave Matter, and I'm Bo Bayman. Glad you could join us for another episode. Want to talk a little basketball right now. Robin Pinchton and Conzo Martin's teams on the floor practicing. It is because there's only 3 football games so far at Mizzou. It's hard to remember that we're getting close to Halloween and we've already tipped off practice with college basketball, but they're off and running on the floor inside of Mizzou Arena. And I know there's not a lot of access to practice, but nevertheless, that's going to heat up here in a hurry, isn't it?
Well, it's supposed to. I mean, November 25th is when they can start playing games. We still don't know anything about a concrete schedule. There's so many balls are in the air on that one. Conzo Martin expressed it, I thought, pretty candidly last week when he's still not really certain or comfortable that they are playing basketball in the middle of a pandemic. I think he's being pretty cautious there. And I think one concern has to be, we've seen what contact tracing can do to football teams. What about basketball teams? They've only got 15 players. Most of them all live together to some degree. They're around each other all the time. In the Big Ten, if you test positive, you're out for 21 days, not 10 like it is in the SEC. So that can impact other games. There's just so many unknowns right now. I mean, what we do know about Missouri, the men's team, is they've got all these guys back, and they're counting on those guys all playing better and being better than they were a year ago and staying healthy. That still is a sort of an unknown because you just never know with this team. It seems like this time of year we're always expecting the best, and they've been disappointing these last 2 years.
It'll be interesting too, because if I'm not mistaken, didn't they just rule that the winter sports get a 0 year as well? So I mean, this team could play this year if they play, and they could play next year.
Yeah, theoretically, but I mean, Drew Smith has already transferred, and this is already his 5th year. Mark Smith, same way. Jeremiah Tillman, we've been expecting maybe to go for 3 years now. Xavier Pinson, we think is going to transfer every other week. It's hard to see him coming back for another year. I think you've kind of got to count on most of those guys moving on. And I think you've got to assume this year is, it's hard to overstate how important this year is for this program, because just assuming those guys all do leave, well, Missouri signed a recruiting class that frankly doesn't provide much instant impact this year. So you're replacing half your team next year. You've got already 5 high school kids signed. You've got a couple more spots in that class, and obviously the transfer portal but most people, I think, look at that 21-22 season as probably a little bit of a step back for Missouri. Now, if you're taking a step back from NCAA tournament, and now, hey, you've been in the tournament twice in 4 years, and despite all the injuries and all that, then that's okay. But if you're around 500 again, like you've been the last 2 years, and then you're looking at a step back from that, look, I'm not saying Conzo's job is in danger, because I don't think it is. But at some point, and I think that point is if this team is not in the tournament this year, I think you got to start having the hard conversations that nobody really wants to have.
Yeah, no doubt about it. As far as the women go, Dave, They're totally reshaped in the last 2 years since Sophie left. Last year was completely a learning year, a down year that nobody saw coming. They knew that it'd be a step back, but this year they're trying to reload and get back up near the top of the SEC.
Yeah, it's a mix of all these transfers that Robin brought in that are now eligible from all different parts of the world, really, not just the country. And then you've got the 2 freshmen last year who showed so many signs of maybe becoming great players in this league, but they've got to kind of take that next step. It's a bit of a chemistry experiment when you're adding all those transfers who were around the team last year in practice, but just weren't eligible to play. And Asia Blackwell's got to be a great player. There's no doubt about that. I mean, she showed moments of it last year. She showed games. She showed series, weeks, whatever. She's got to be a great player, and they've got to surround her with the right pieces. Last year I think she was trying to do it all on her own sometimes, and that's hard for a freshman in this league. So we'll see. It's an important year for Robin too, but I think she's probably got more pieces than she has in a couple seasons. Yeah,
no doubt. Women's soccer draws with LSU 1-1 on senior night. They'll host Mississippi State on Saturday at 6:30, and then women's volleyball will finally get underway after a couple of delays. They're supposed to play tonight, which is Wednesday night, against Alabama. Lastly, before we get out of here, just a quick thought, one more quick thought. Kentucky at Missouri. Dave, I'll start with you. Can the Tigers make it 2 wins in a row?
They can win this game if they play like they did offensively against LSU, and then like they did, in the last 44 seconds against LSU on defense. But man, I just think this is a kind of a tough matchup. I mean, Connor Bazelak hasn't gone against a defense like this yet, at least a secondary that's done what it's done. And the line of scrimmage, I'd have some concerns if I were Missouri's defensive line. I think Kentucky has a chance to kind of control this game up front. So I as of now, I'm picking Kentucky, but I think it could be really close. The 4th quarter game.
And Gabe, what about you?
Yeah, I haven't made up my mind yet who I'm going to pick. All signs do point to Kentucky, but look, number one is this. Missouri isn't winning this game if they lose the turnover battle 4-0 like they did against LSU. I mean, they did that against LSU and still somehow managed to win the game. Kentucky's not going to let that happen, and this is a team, you better start fast. You get behind Kentucky 10-0, 14-0, they're just going to sit on the ball for 38 minutes and you're going to have no prayer to come back. So Missouri's got some things to fix. Kentucky's favored for a reason, but it is not by any means an unwinnable game.
Yeah, we'll see what happens on Saturday at 3 o'clock, and we'll talk about it next week right here on the Sidelines. For Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter, Brian and Matt behind the scenes, I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks as always for watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22.